Welcome back to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran McKay, and today we are kicking off International Women's Month. Our guest today, Ishaa Vinod Chopra, is a writer, a mental health advocate, and the author of Finding Order in Disorder, a Bipolar Memoir. Through her work, she shares her personal journey with bipolar disorder, surviving domestic violence, and navigating the stigma of mental health within our South Asian communities. Ishaa's story is one of resilience, of learning to find healing in creativity and reclaiming her narrative in a world that often misunderstands people like her. Her journey is not just about personal survival, but also about challenging the systems that have failed so many of us when it comes to our mental health. How does someone who has had lived experience create space for themselves when mental health frameworks weren't built with them in mind? How do we break the cycles of silence and shame in our own communities while recognizing the deeper systemic barriers at play? That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's get into it. Ishaa, welcome to the podcast. How are we today?
Doing good. Thank you so much, Karen, for having me today. First off, I love your podcast, and I'm happy to have this conversation with you. I know we connected before, and I'm really looking forward to this and where it goes.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here too. We've had a great conversation. Honestly, nothing gives me more energy when the magic of brown women coming together in the way that we have to talk about the things that we're taught to not talk about. So I'm also honored to have someone like you on today that braves these kinds of conversations and pushes them out. So thank you for your time and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to just get into it with you. I'm going to start with your story. I want to know, maybe you can share a little bit about what is bipolar disorder. It's a complex diagnosis. Many of us kind of heard of it. Some people use it as a description, oh, I'm so bipolar, which is really offensive. And I think we need to stop doing that. And a lot of us don't really know what it is. So I would love for you to share, what is this disorder? And also, when you were diagnosed, what was that time like for you? How did it come to be?
So that's a very good question, because honestly, I don't think I have answered that before.
Oh.
Very often what happens is doctors get asked that about the patients. But what about the people who are actually having those lived experiences? What can they share to add to the narrative? So I guess for me, like you said, it's different for everybody. Earlier, bipolar disorder was called manic depressive illness. The difference between for me an illness and a disorder is a disorder, it can be managed. There are ways to cope with it. And very often what ends up happening, especially with neurodivergent disorders, is once you have that, there's so much self-stigma, so you think that there's no way around it. Also, it manifests in very different ways. So that there's gender differences between, the way the symptoms take form. So I know for me, essentially, I have more of and there are many types. There's about 4 of them. And I'm not going to go into much detail, but you can look it up. And there's bipolar 1, 2, and then there's 2, 3 others. But I know for me, I have had lived experiences more, not so much with depression, but on the other spectrum. And I have had mixed episodes. So that essentially a mixed episode is when you have emotions of where you feel happy and sad at the same time. And in my case, it has often been triggered with real life experiences, as opposed to, say, like intoxication or drugs or alcohol. And I know very often what ends up happening is, it depends also when you're diagnosed. So for me, I was diagnosed when I was 16. So at that time, luckily, I had not even like had alcohol. So I didn't find the need to, drink, and because that also interferes when you have medication. So there's a lot of factors that play in what it basically consists of. So once you do fall sick, if you have, because it's a phase, right? It's an episode. And if at that point you're like proper attention is not given, essentially what can take place is that you can have relapses. So it needs to be definitely tended to with care. And I think very often, because of all the ways to manage it, and I think one of the biggest ways, a lot of doctors also have spoken about this, but is keeping in touch with the circadian cycle. So it's just we have to basically not have late nights, and just keeping with that rhythm, because and having our meds on the exact same time every single day. Now I know a lot of people also out there are also not having medication, so it all also depends on your approach. Because for me, it's just I have been on a certain one since age 16, and it's worked well for me. And I guess it's just a thing that I have that I don't want to try to get off, because it's just been going well. But the other thing I want to also state is, after the age of 30, it in most cases, 80 to 90% almost, or maybe more even, it almost dies down. It can get better. And in my case, at least I can say it's been better for me. So you can look up that research. Again, I'm not a doctor, I don't have the details, but a doctor has told me this. So it has been much better for me. So the past 4 or 5 years, and so to give context, I'm 34. I was diagnosed at 16, and past 4 or 5 years for me have been extremely stable, and they've been the happiest of my life. I've also had other happy years in my life, but that was I can share about that later. But I guess getting back to your point about what bipolar is, it used to be called manic depressive illness. In the past, they couldn't tell the difference between schizophrenia and bipolar. In fact, when I was diagnosed, they thought it was schizoaffective disorder, but actually, I had a family doctor come in from India to correctly diagnose, because at that time there was they were not sure. And this time, actually, I was in Alberta. I was in Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
So I know you're in Calgary.
Yeah.
So I had my junior high and high school there.
So can I ask you, like, when you were 16, coming from my understanding of working in mental health and understanding how the Western world talks about the developmental phases from 0 to 18, 16 is such a fragile time, because there's a lot of things going on for development. Adolescence, I is the most romantic time. I always say I love teenagers, because it's one of the most they're working so hard in brain development at that age. And when these kinds of changes are happening in our body at 16, whether it be hormonal development, whether it be, brain development, emotional, social, all of that stuff, how is it that the doctors kind of lean to something so complex like bipolar for a 16-year-old who hasn't really fully developed yet? So what would be going on for a 16-year-old that wouldn't be typical, that would require a doctor to think that it's more of a mental health, diagnosis like bipolar?
Yeah. So actually, at that time, for them, it was very clear that it was something that could be related to either drug overdose. So for what they did is, first they did a blood test to eliminate that factor. And essentially my symptom was, I had gone to a United Nations camp, okay? And I came back, I did not get sleep for what they say is about at least a week to 2 weeks, no sleep. There was zero sleep, fast speech, and grandiose thoughts, which are all explicitly linked with bipolar disorder. Okay, but then of course it could also be schizoaffective, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of diagnose that, perhaps. Although my theory is that sometimes they just keep you there to test medications on you. I know this is a very bad theory, but
it's a theory that's happened. It's true, though.
Yeah, the more and and more I look into the system, though, I sometimes do have to question that, because I don't think it really takes that long to diagnose. I was there for many months, and but I was extremely fortunate and blessed that I was 16 when I was diagnosed, because I know I have been, as I can share later, I have been in an adult rehab as well here in Toronto, and that is a whole different story, right? Because it's definitely more it's more serious in terms of like whoever you are with and admitted along with. So, and not to judge anyone here, because we're all on a journey. Like, for example, I can share one thing. I still remember someone told me, "Oh, you shouldn't go near that person because she's been violent with someone." And now imagine I'm in this unit with like X number of people, and I've been told this by a nurse, and I was like, "No, I think she's fine." So I go up to her, we start talking, and we started to do some yoga together. We became friends. So I think it's just the mindset also sometimes that the medical establishment has about certain people, and
Mm-hmm.
also the way they treat them,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of hierarchy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we need to be more human when it comes to these things. But again, I'm sidetracking, so
No, and I
back to
think I
you.
think I think the point you're making is going to come up a lot today, because we'll get there.
Yeah.
Just to go back to the time of your diagnosis, for our community in particular, anytime a child has, whether it's physical health, mental health is harder, I think. But when there is a health scare, it impacts a whole family. We come from a very family systems community, collective care, and word travels and people worry. And when it's mental health related, it's even scarier, because these labels and names are translated very differently for our community. So I'm just really curious, prior to your diagnosis, what was the understanding of mental health? Like, was it through the community? Was it reaction? Was it response? And then what happened after the diagnosis? Anything change?
Yeah, so for me, I was not as much integrated into the South Asian community back in Edmonton. Most of my best friends were from different countries. I had Canadian friends, I had a Korean friend who's still actually best friends with me in Toronto. Written about her as well, Kate. So we're very close. And so I did not, as such, have that experience with South Asian community much. But if I were to speak about my own family, I was blessed that they took the effort to really they really tried to dissect and unpack what really it was. And we were very fortunate to have a family doctor in India, who actually was also at the launch of my book in India, in Mumbai. Dr. Rajesh Parekh. He really tried to shed light on what exactly it is, and how you don't need to stigmatize yourself or blame anyone for it, because if you look in history, you look back, so many talented artists have had this. And I was literally, I'll tell you, when I was discharged for the first time, literally a nurse handed me a very special list of all the people in history who've had this. And Van Gogh was on that list. Of course, he had an unfortunate life, but what a beautiful, like, artist.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Buzz Aldrin was on there,
Mm-hmm.
who was an astronaut, who often, I mean, you always think of the first person who landed on the moon, but he was also there. But not that all the numbers matter, but he is like, come on, he went there. Imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And here we talk about people having bipolar who can't even, like, oh, jet lag impacts you. And imagine this gentleman went out into space with that diagnosis. So it's just, I mean, it's mind-boggling to even for me to like fathom the amount of people who have had it, who deal with it, who continue to come out with it.
Yeah.
And again, things like these help people who are diagnosed to firstly not only come out with, but not feel like feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
Like, this is not something that you have to feel ashamed of. Not at all. And that was the whole point of writing that memoir, because everyone was like, "Are you sure?" Like, and there was a lot of edits too, because of course I'm writing about a real life, a real person. Families are implicated, especially in my case with my father and my stepmother. It definitely was a challenge. We navigated that. The family supported it, and especially my father was a strong pillar of support. Like he really did help. And because he did realize that this was the voice had to be heard,
Mm-hmm.
and it's it was very therapeutic for me as well. And even my mother took a very like a step in helping me also process, because that time she was doing her a master's thesis in at York University, and I was a research associate on her documentary film. So I was actually like subject as well as a research associate. So all my writing, poetry, dance, we would all get together and work on it as a family. So that is a true example of a collaborative artistic family production.
Totally.
And
I don't think you could describe it any better than that. That's it's interesting to hear you talk about your journey with your family, and big shout out to them, because I think we see this with physical health. So it is 10 times more when it's our mental health. When we are dealing with mental health, immediately there's a lot of isolation. We're in our own heads. We don't feel clear. We feel foggy. And then again, you throw in a complex diagnosis like yours in there, all sorts of things come. And the most familiar thing for us in those hard times that we need are our trustworthy community, our loved ones, whether it's our caregivers, our siblings, whoever that is in our family. And that's one thing that I'm very proud of. And you and I've talked about this, that our community does so well. We don't need the DSM. We've had a lot of healing that the Indigenous community does, that our community does, that really is about managing our mental health. And somewhere along the line, we've lost that. And I think when we come to the Western world, a lot of it is sort of regurgitated back to us through, DSM and someone else's theory, which we'll get into in a minute. So it's very refreshing to hear you talk about how your family played such a healing part in your journey, because I think our community teaches us that healing isn't just fix it. Healing is learning how to live alongside the pain that we have, whether it's our mental health, whether it's the loss, grief. And so I'm looking forward to, in a minute or two, to talk a little bit more about your creative side. I just want to go back to your book for a second. I want to ask you, what was a sort of tipping point or reason or motivation, whatever you want to call it, that led you to want to write the book?
okay, so that's yeah, again, of course, an excellent question. I started off with journaling. So I had only like 2-3 pages, and once I had that, I shared it with my father. I gave it a very heavy title in the beginning, "In the Pursuit of Universal Truths," like something like, because I really wanted to, it for me, it was about like exploring philosophy and life and my interpretations and perceptions. And there was a suggestion in the family that I think it was, yeah, it was my stepmother who said, "Oh, well, why don't you write about bipolar?" But I realized that I was anyways doing that because I was already writing from that lens, you know? And when I had about 3-4 pages, my father read it, and he came up with the title in its very initial stages, when it was just a seed. He said, "You know what? It I think you should call it Finding Order in Disorder." And I was so inspired and motivated.
Yeah,
And I mean, I can clearly say that, I mean, if I wanted, I could have said, "Oh, I came up with the title." But I think that credit for that goes definitely to my father, being the artistic mind that he is in his art, that it really motivated me. And actually, that title sort of propelled me into me finding my own order in whatever chaos there was in my life. And so I think everyone in a way does that, right?
hmm
It doesn't matter if you have a mental health diagnosis or not, because we're all sorting through that pile of garbage, and it all makes like, how much are we willing to put on our shoulders? How much do we let go of? How much
hmm
do we say whatever happened in the past is past, and I know there's a lot of like people saying, "Oh, live in the present." I mean, look at how much you have like all the Buddhist philosophies and the Dalai Lama. Like those, I really, really like to cling on to those because it's. Trust me, when I talk about those things that took place a decade ago or back then, it's like it's a learning experience. It's like I'm talking about a different person in a different time.
Hmm.
I have come a long way, and I feel that in this moment when I'm talking to you, I'm just with you,
I feel it
and
too. Yeah.
that's the magic of it. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think sometimes we get so pulled between the past and the future that the present is just we completely mess it up because of that. And I'm not saying that I don't do it. I am also very like it's very difficult to be in the present moment. So
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely. I think that's why we go to the past or the future, because
yeah,
being
it's like
still
the
in now is definitely something in art you have to master sometimes, it seems like.
yeah.
Can I ask a little bit more about the book? You do talk about your trauma, and you share particularly surviving domestic violence at a particular time in your life. And I'm wondering if that's something that we can shed some light on, because unfortunately it's treated like a taboo in our community, yet it's taken so many of our women, and we've lost a lot, whether they are with us today or not. We have lost a lot of women in so many different ways. And I think there's a lot of women in our community that don't even understand that they are in an unsafe relationship. And there's all sorts of reasons why. And so I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about some of the, common myths about abuse that keep women from recognizing that they are in a violent relationship.
Yes, absolutely. So I actually I almost wish that I had shed even more light on it in the memoir, but this was because I think I very loosely touched on a lot of topics, and I will hopefully go into it further in my second book. But to answer your question, when I was going through all of that, not once did someone tell me when I'm in a foreign land to go to a police and actually complain about this.
Mm-hmm.
My psychiatrist then told me, I would tell you, of course, that it's bad for you, but I'm telling you, especially it is bad for you because you have this diagnosis. And then I realized, okay, and then I tried to like question it. And then the tipping point for me actually took place. There were two. So the first one was where there was a first blow to my back. And it was a very, very silly, like, I don't even remember it clearly, but it was an argument I had, and I had come back late from teaching dance class and all of that. But the reaction was so profound that I was literally like standing near a table and I'm giving some trigger warning there. If someone wants to take a 10-second break, we're talking about domestic abuse. And then this man comes towards me, and my back is bent down and grabs me by the hair with the elbow and knocks me on two spots on my spine, which essentially, looking back, I was in so much pain. It was intense. From a scale of 1 to 10, I'd go to say 9. I stayed at a friend's place that night, and that couple was kind enough to host me. And of course, they knew about everything that was happening. And following that, I had to go back and I stayed there. But the point is, I realized that, okay, now I have to really get out. Now this is getting out of control.
Did you
And
recognize there was signs prior to that?
yes, I did. But I think what also took place in my mind was because I had a chance to a new life in Germany. I was the only Kathak dancer in Dresden. I had a very strong community engagement there,
Mm.
a very strong circle. I have friends visiting me even now. Me and my present husband, they visited recently. I had a friend. My friend's husband, who I collaborated with back then, he's a scientist and artist, sitarist and tabla artist from Delhi, but he's international, so he travels. He was here for a conference. We met. So the kind of connections and bonds that I made back there, it was something that I did on my own steam. And it was, I, re- I had made a home for myself there. I did not want to leave. So I tried to make it work. But what I didn't realize was I was putting myself at risk and harm every time I would return back to what you would call, like, it was not a safe shelter for
Yeah.
me. It was not a home by any standard. It was a house. It was an apartment, but it was not a home in the true sense. And I realized after this incident took place that something had to be done. My uncle supported me, I'd say the most, in the sense, because he really had the bandwidth and the emotional intelligence to sort through those issues and conversations with me, because he really was, God bless his soul, he passed away due to COVID. Veer Papa. He was like, actually, my father's recent film, he's dedicated to him. And they were like this, literally. But he was like literally like a second father to me. So I was very close to him. And I guess his number one advice, since I have now brought him up, is he always used to say, let Isha help Isha.
Hmm.
And I think that is one advice that I would want to kind of pay it forward and pass it on to whoever's out there, because essentially that's it, right? Like, you have to help yourself. It has to come from within. And I know that it's difficult, but once we get to that stage, trust me, for anyone who's listening, there's no turning back, because that's when you know that you have the power and the agency to take charge of the situation. Many a times we hand it over to, oh my God, I have all, I'm so, what am I, what's gonna happen? And we give it over. We give our lives over to the medical establishment, to the family, to the society, to judge us and to label us. And I have emerged and thanks to my mentor, Dr. Adam W.J. Davies, I would really like to credit him. I did a research internship. I would really like to credit them. So they introduced me to the concept of MAD studies. And as I was reading my memoir, which was already published then, I realized that I do identify as MAD. And so that I'm essentially, I want to, and the whole concept of also sanism, which I got introduced to in their scholarship and articles. So that's basically the othering of individuals who are disabled or diagnosed by the society. And it happens so often. Of course, in the context of my research, it was with early childhood and how we have to fill out I can share this later, but how we have to fill out a question which basically asks us to reveal whether we have, any mental or physical disability. And that's a requirement in order to be registered with the College of Early Childhood Educators. First,
To
you have
work with the
ECE,
vulnerable
which is,
population. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then this is also if you want to be registered with the college.
Okay,
So
right.
essentially, once you get your diploma, then you get registered. Then, of course, when you get registered, you get a slight increase in pay because then you're a registered educator.
Right.
You've gone through the training. But I think what essentially the statement published and supported by the staff and board of AECO supported. AECO is the Association of Early Childhood Educators of Ontario. Essentially, what they supported is that, and it was co-authored by Professor Adam Davies, Brooke Richardson, and Michelle Jones. It basically spoke to how ambiguous the nature of the question is, and how there's a pressure to reveal, and how, according to the Ontario Human Rights Code, actually, that you don't have to reveal. Doctors don't say you have to reveal. If you're doing well, why should you have to reveal to anyone that? Because and the whole question is, because once that goes into the system and you're registered and you have that number, it essentially goes to every workplace that you work with, so the employers know that you have this disability, which I think is problematic on so many levels.
Yeah,
So
it'll continue to be problematic until all of the organizations and all of us know how to actually understand and accept mental health illnesses and disorders. That until then, we'll treat it like a stigma and not hire people and not think twice of having you, because people think that someone like you that has a bipolar disorder is dangerous and is risky to other people. And unfortunately, that's how the world is continuing to operate. I would imagine you probably could speak to that better than I could.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that also the problem is because a lot of people generalize these things, right?
Yes, yeah, it's black or white.
They take out one incident, God knows how many times that incident may have happened. They blow it out of proportion. What do you see when you go on the internet and you read about these things? You read about all the negative things, and you see about the violence and all that horrible stuff. And of course, these things happen. But does anyone ask, does it happen with also people who are not diagnosed? What is happening with our society here?
Mm-hmm.
Not only are we perpetuating people who are diagnosed, and then they have to dealing with all these issues and symptoms. The diagnosis itself gets fueled. You have other people who are also, and I guess in the care sector, there's burnout, exhaustion, and all those things and factors. So it's like this, we all are going through the same thing, but the people who are diagnosed have to bear the brunt of it because they're diagnosed. So why can't we approach it from a more compassionate lens? We have to change the way we approach. We have to change the framework. We have to flip it.
Mm-hmm. So you said a lot of really good things, and I just want to ask you, maybe a couple more things about the domestic violence. So for women and people listening today, there's always the obvious signs, the physical abuse, but yet domestic violence is more than that. It's not just someone hitting me. What are some of the less obvious signs of an abusive relationship that women should be aware of?
Yes, so there are many of course layers to abuse. You have that emotional abuse. You have that abuse where you have marital rape too. That's one.
Yeah.
And when in some places that's not even considered a crime. But so there's that. Then there's also not feeling safe in a home. So for example, if someone were to break something but they're not hurting you, but there's something that's happening, within the household, which is supposed to be a safe haven and is not for many people. And so now this is not just focusing on gender based. This is also within the family, sometimes it happens. And how do you respond to something like that? What are your boundaries? What are your boundaries that you are laying across? And of course, for children, that's harder because children don't have a choice, right? They can't walk out and live somewhere else. I think when it comes to especially being in a relationship, definitely having that agency in the relationship, setting boundaries, especially for women if they want to, I'd say, I would quote Priyanka Chopra on this. She's my idol. I know it's hard to entirely be financially independent all the time, but we can aim for that, and we never do because our society is laid out as such that, I will marry a man who has that, the security, then I'll be fine. But why are we thinking that way? We can just do our own thing. We don't need to be attached. I do consider myself a feminist, but then there are times when I question myself and say, oh my God, why am I acting like this? Because I don't think a true feminist would act like that. But I have these inbuilt auto responses, if you were to how to respond to a situation, because I come from India. I have South Asian roots. And I feel guilty sometimes. I know if I were to say this, people would be appalled. But sometimes even leaving my partner and going to a different country if he can't enter it, I'm like, I feel bad. I'm leaving him. These kind of things. We need to really question those.
Yeah.
So
I think we've built, especially in our Indian community, we can thank colonization for patriarchy. But I think there is so much to unpack there, because we've really been built as from the minute we come out of the womb screaming. I think that's the last time that we'll be loud, because soon after we're told to shh, quiet, and take care of everyone else. And a lot of women often will think they're protecting their children, the family name. We are not individuals. We are collective. So if I'm feeling pain, then my mother, sister, brother are going to feel that pain. And I don't want them to go through that. And a lot of women are pinned up against that. And I think the more we come out and talk about what is actually a safe relationship, where there isn't this extreme jealousy or ownership that the man has of her, then we can start to sort of work through how to prevent it. Here, you call the police, and unfortunately, like our system in Canada doesn't really know how to respond to communities like ours, and so the women are constantly told, just leave. And that's not the way that can work. As simple as it seems, it takes a minute for a woman, to get to that place. And I think the more we can share and talk about, stories like yours, putting them in the books and coming out and talking about them, may help some of our women recognize, okay, I'm in this place. But then once they recognize it, it's almost harder. It's almost harder when you realize, holy shit, I'm not in a safe relationship. So sometimes people don't want to realize that too. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Definitely. Yeah, I did go through that. So there definitely is a stage of denial that I think we go through as survivors of abuse, because I think we always want to, it's that cycle, when something happens and then you come to a phase where there's like a makeup phase, and then you think, oh, it's all good. It's like a honeymoon phase. Then it goes back to that violent phase. And then you're again back there. So you're circling. For me, honestly, what really did it for me, I will actually tell you something. So I want to refer to the book The Power of Now here. That's really been very helpful to me, by Eckhart Tolle. The concept of pain body and pain memories for me really strikes a chord, because what essentially happened to me is there was a period when the abuse was happening for me, and then we tried to make it work. There was a break, and then I took a break, and then but when we tried to make it work again, there was an incident that took place. Obviously, there were no efforts made to amend situations. It repeated itself. So there was a tiny slap on my cheek. The relationship was on thin ice. But that's when I realized that, because that one incident, because it was related to all the other string of incidents that took place, I went to the washroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm out. And I think at some point, and we all will reach that stage, sooner the better. I think even in mainstream media, I mean, like movies like, even like Thappad and all, you just have that one slap and you're out. We have to question these things. When they take place, it has to be talked about. We can't suppress it. We have to normalize these conversations, especially in family systems. I mean, I've spoken to so many people now in India. Sometimes you have like a family of psychiatrists, and it takes place within these, communities where you would think that they're, like educated individuals, but these things are still happening there. So I don't think it matters where in the world you are, what your socioeconomic status is, what your background is. I think that this is such a phenomenon that is so, like, it's universal, that we really need to tackle it. And I know right now we're talking about South Asian communities, but we are here in Canada, and also because it's so multicultural, these things happen so often across the board. What you were mentioning earlier about how it's treated by the police, we need culturally relevant and sensitive approaches and frameworks, and we need anti-racist approaches to these things, because why do we think that these things only happen with BIPOC communities? Because that's not the truth. Why are we not talking about what's actually happening everywhere, regardless of color, background, and status?
I think that's a really important point, and I think it's always interesting when race comes up. It's it's not coming up for the right reason to help systems, work through their policies and their mandates and dismantled. It comes up when it's a profiling issue. As we continue talking about our systems that we are supposed to go to, like the police, for support, that's a whole different conversation, because it is something that I agree we need to be continuing to bring back and challenge for the women that have been forgotten. And one thing maybe we can circle back to before we move forward, because this is a conversation we can, with domestic violence, I don't want to rush it. I think we're just opening the door to this, and I think we will always come back to it. But I do want to, before I move to the next piece with you, if someone listening right now is in an abusive relationship but feels stuck, what are the first steps they can take? What is some advice that you can give them?
I'm going to take a minute here to process that. Now, if you're talking about someone who's going through that in Canada, I think for them, the first thing would be to, I know this is a very cliche thing to say, but you got to reach out to the community, whomever you know. There's no shame in sharing. There's no shame in being vulnerable. There's no shame in taking help when you need it. We're all humans and we're there for each other. Now, if I know there's women living in silos whom actually don't have anyone. Now, in those cases, we need to reach out to the societal system where there are community centers. We have a lot of, helpline numbers. In fact, I think over here we can even share.
Yep.
I know you have a wealth of resources, which
share.
I'm sure you do. Yeah. So reach out to those resources. I know in Toronto we have a lot of good community centers. There's the Toronto Neighborhood Organization, and then there's for mental health, of course, is CAMH and Stella's Place, and so many other wonderful organizations. There's Hope Foundation. There's a lot of them, and in fact, there's even Soch Mental Health. So they have a lot of specifically for South Asian, but we need to reach out to someone. We need to let someone know that, Percy, this is happening and what the avenues are. Because a lot of the times we think that we cannot talk about it. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is we suppress it, and then there can either be a tipping point where the person walks out, or in the really worst cases, it's too late. So And in too late either, I mean something really bad happened. Like, for example, I'll give you a very quick, brief example here of the real life story. And it was made into a movie with Aishwarya Rai called Provoked. And the reason I know this is because I actually saw this with my ex-husband. He screened this film. And it actually, something flipped inside. Because I realized that, imagine what woman had gone through. She just moved from Punjab, and she'd actually, again, it was not culturally relevant for her. She was in UK, and she was pushed to the limit, and in a way provoked to do something to her husband at that time. I realized I did not want to be pushed to that level. But also I realized that, wow, look at that strength of that woman, the strength of a woman. And it was really a tipping point for me to see that film. So also when we're talking about resources, look out for real life examples. Look out, you can now, we have the internet at our fingertips. Let's use that. And if we feel unsafe to search those things, there's ways to go into incognito mode and do it when your partner is not around. We need to find ways to reach out to those resources and get information, and then get the next step. I know I sound hypocritical here, but I realize that I want to share something which also my father always shares with me. He says that there is enough good in this world if we want to see it. You shall find what you seek. You have to seek it. Mm-hmm. Because if you're staying at home and that's it, it's like the deeper and deeper you go into that abyss, it's harder to come out of it. It took me almost a year to get out of my first marriage. And how sad is that, right? But
But
of
also,
course,
it was, if you think about it, 1 year, some women would probably say, holy crap, I've been living with this, in my marriage for 30, 40, however many years. So
exactly.
time is so relative, whether it's a year
Yeah,
or 6
absolutely.
years, you like you said, you had your breaking point when you looked at yourself in the mirror. And I keep thinking of your wise uncle saying, let Ishaa help Ishaa.
And I got lucky actually that, of course, I was not able to conceive them because of my medication. But of course, it probably would have happened as it does in so many cases.
Yeah.
That's how you see women marrying abusive men who've had issues. And I want to quote Julia Roberts here too, because I really like this quote of hers. I don't know the exact one. I'm going to paraphrase. But she said, we don't want someone who's like a project to work on, right? Like, that's not, we're not there to fix someone here. Like, we need a partner.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what I would like share that, because that's so empowering when you hear that, because we always think, and not to say that you can't be there for each other and help out.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to do that as partners.
I think your points about reaching out, and you've listed so many different ways. And I just want to sum up, the first and foremost thing is reaching out to yourself, making sure that,
Yes,
that, and then after that, I think finding a friend or loved one or anonymous number, there are all these sorts of things, but all of that stuff won't matter until Ishaa helps Ishaa. So I appreciate
and also
that.
journaling. I didn't mention that, but journaling, oh God, how it helps, and how, like, it's cathartic. You write anything to yourself, it's a mirror. You're looking into yourself. So write, do poetry, do some art, do any kind of activity or hobby that keeps you occupied. If pets help, try to get a pet. If you have kids and it's too much, then it's okay. That's how I actually coped in Germany, right? I would be out most of the time.
Yeah.
But then when I had to come home, then of course you come home to like reality. But then there's got to be ways where you have to, pull yourself out, and then the community uplifts you, because you realize that you're not the only one. Everyone has issues. You don't feel alone. You don't feel that suddenly you're in a silo, which unfortunately happens when you're within the four walls. You're in that, you're surrounded by it, and those thoughts keep bouncing off. So that's, you're not giving yourself space for anything else. So definitely reaching out to yourself. You said it so beautifully.
I just took that from what your uncle said. That has really sat with me as well. Like we said, we've opened a door and we invite more people to want to join conversations about domestic violence and get the word out and continue to keep it out. And we appreciate those that have already been ahead of us doing the work. I just want to jump to a different part of your journey. I want to go to the part of you that has your light shining and your creativity. And I want to talk a little bit about your early childhood work and mental health in young people, if we may. So you've worked with young people in mental health spaces. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen when it comes to children's mental health?
I know that with children's mental health, although I have not had training for children's mental health, because I am an early childhood educator, when I've been in the field, I have seen so many things taking place. But I realize that as an educator, we have a responsibility, because, of course, the children are there for maximum time in the day. And then they all go home to a certain home. Everyone has different homes. And then all these children come together and they're in this space. We need to be there for them. And I'm speaking from an educator's point of view here, to create that trusting relationship. I think one of the biggest takeaways I took from my degree at George Brown, and actually this was part of the diploma curriculum, is the attachment theory. And how, especially, and this works a lot for infants too, right? Because you really have to develop that bond with them, and how you do that. I know, even 0 to 3 organizations, they have all these like research saying that if that child has even one person who kind of just smiles at them and makes them feel at home, and just that has to be there. So, and I know that maybe not each child gets that when they go back home. Sometimes there are a lot of children there who are not having those safe spaces. So how can we as educators create that safe space for expression, well-being, belonging, all those foundations of how does learning happen, which are so critical. Those foundations are critical for not just educators and children, but also families and I guess that entire environment and system. So we all come together
Yeah.
and how to bridge the gap between what goes on here at the during the day and then the families come sharing as much as you can. And I know there's some families who do not have the bandwidth to even interact much. You see that, because they have their own stressors at home.
Mm-hmm.
So they just have time to just come pick up, drop off, and there has to be ways to just reach out and also conflict resolution, right? How do you do that? Like you have two kids and there's this thing happening, not making a child feel guilty or for something that is happening, which may be seen as, especially I hate this phrase, he's a problem child or he's a this, he's that, and or he's a burden, like for example, even for children who are on the spectrum, trust me, like I've seen it so often. All they want is a hand to hold. You just hold their hand. Like I know this one educator taught me this technique, and it helped me so much too when I work with children on the spectrum on the field. Like you just kind of hold their hand, and sometimes you just keep squeezing, and you're there for them. They know that you're there, and that connection is so, we underrate that
Yeah.
bond.
We do. Yeah.
You don't have to say a lot.
Yeah.
The other thing also is, how do you make that bond and that communication culturally relevant? So I had a little education in French, and of course, and during my junior high school. So we had a child who's bilingual and spoke French, and mother spoke French. Now, moment I started speaking little words here and there, little broken sentences in French, it just changed the entire thing. And this, of course, goes for any language. So there's many ways to make a child feel at home. And I think we need to really take that effort to make the child feel at home and belong, the trust, the attachment, and also not call out a child or say that I know this happened a lot in India as well, where I have seen, um, well, there's of course there's corporal punishment there, and I've been through it. It still happens in some places. It's sad to see that, because you don't ever want to hurt a child. Sometimes it does not leave a child, and that child will one day be an adult, and you never know how that might impact that adult's relationship, the life course trajectories, what is going to happen to that child going out tomorrow.
Yeah.
They have relationship going ahead, so we don't think about these things because 0 to 6 is so critical, and it's foundation, really.
You really nailed it. The best thing we can do for children is help them feel seen. And you've listed so many different ways that we can. And I think you're right. There's lots of, families that have all sorts of things going on where time and all these things are just not in the way. But the reality is we have our children. We have to be responsible for the outcomes of what happens. And our children are prevention and an opportunity for a lot of us to break barriers, break cycles. And I think, whether it's physical punishment or not, there's all these sorts of things that we've all been taught. So your example of that early attachment and how it carries through adulthood, well, we're examples of that. So I can tell you 30,000 things that I should know better in my relationship, but I can't break it because of a lot of how I was taught things growing up. And now I'm an adult, and now I have to be responsible for myself, and I have to break that because guess what? I'm a mom too now. It's a cycle that a lot of times we get caught in. And working in mental health for so many years, I worked with young people that lived at facilities that they didn't have anyone. The government was their caregiver, and any child that grows up in care of government, the stats are not good. And you're absolutely right. If all of these children that we worked with, when there were good, counselors on shift who cared, it'd be amazing how we saw their stats and so many things change in the time with us. Like you said, whether it was holding a hand, whether it was looking at them and talking, whether it was giving them the time. And there's so many different times in the day we can do that. We're picking up our kids from school, work, we're driving for 5 minutes. We can say a lot in that 5 minutes. And so I really, really challenge us to do some of that work with our kids, that if we don't deal with our own stuff, it's going to come out onto them, and we shape them. And a big part of this whole journey of what we're talking about today is their mental health. Teaching our kids that they are in charge of their well-being at some point, giving them that responsibility. I think sometimes we take that away from them because we want them to be kids for so long, as they should. But we also have to teach them the way the world works, which is they have to be responsible for themselves. So what can we do to help us better understand how to support our kids' mental health?
I think something that would, when I look back, I'm going to answer this question where I go back and I'm a child, because I want to relate it to that, and also relate it to what I learned in my studies at George Brown. So I feel that the best thing caregivers, families can do for a child is make the child feel safe and at home, and also feel so loved and, like you said, seen. Because once they're able to express themselves in that environment, that will carry on when they actually become school age, and then adolescent, and then adults. And that having that bond and that relationship will actually go a long way. Because in the West also, you see parents that eventually they will age, and then that whole cycle of, if that relationship is not strong, then the parents will also have to experience that, right? So we have to create that strong community. And I guess that's one of the things you had mentioned, which is sometimes the difference between like the isolated way of the individual way of like approaching things, as opposed to the collective and community efforts that we do, especially in South Asian culture. Because if we see it as like something to solve together,
Totally.
and that has its pros and cons, right? We don't want people telling us what to do, what not to do, or take agency and think for ourselves, because then we will always seek that validation. We'll say, auntie, what do you think we should do? I should do. Tell me what to do. Because then essentially our power is robbed to kind of make a decision and choice. And same goes for adults and children.
Totally.
So I guess to answer your question, really making that child feel loved, just showering them. Because I'll tell you one thing, when I look back, I don't remember much from my childhood, but what I do remember are those strong bonding moments. I remember my dad taking me to the retreat, which is a small, like a little hotel in Juhu, where he just took me under this waterfall. And I remember I went there when I was a bit older, and I saw, oh my God, that waterfall was actually so small. But when I was small, I thought it was a huge waterfall. And I remember him carrying me and taking me underneath there like that. And so, these things and I remember things like my grandma, she used to come to, St. Mary's School. I've written this in my memoir also. They used to twist our ears, and also she used to bribe them with all kinds of the wardens, like, take that, don't like do stuff. And of course they still did it, but the point is, and I remember clearly, if I were to even take names, God bless their souls, God knows where they are in hell or heaven, or if that exists. But Miss Samuels and Miss Henderson, I remember they were there, and they did plenty of not nice things to the kids. But that was the norm, right? Nobody challenged that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think you kind of got us onto our next part, kind of coming towards the end of our conversation, which is we've always had these practices when we look at the West and we look at the East. And going to mental health school years ago, if I were to go back and talk to that 19-year-old Kieran, I would want to remind her, don't forget your roots, because your roots are going to help you become the best mental health practitioner you possibly can. And we give so much credit. I mean, even if you think of the family systems theory, Bowen gets all this credit for coining it in the 50s. But then when you look at the way our families worked, the way our ancestors worked, the way they still work in terms of, you even said it, we are a community. And so if there's an issue, we talk about that together and we share that together. Maybe it's not always great, but definitely it's helpful to have that collective mentality. So I'd love to talk a little bit about coping mechanisms with you and things over the years that you found helpful. And, maybe we can break it down and look at the difference between the West and the East. However, we want to talk about that. So you've mentioned music, you've mentioned dance, you come from a very creative arts family. And I think I was telling you this, I was watching the documentary, The Roshans, a couple of weeks ago on Netflix. And that really got me thinking about how much the West has coined music therapy and how right? Thank you for laughing, right? When we go way back before colonization, before they took all these things from us, there is so much therapy that our ancestors were doing. And so I'd love to hear from you about what's worked, what's helped. You've mentioned some Western stuff like meds and those things, and sometimes those are necessary and we need them. But let's talk about the other parts that have helped you, keep that light shining within you.
I think some things do help, but I still do not agree with how sometimes the West just takes, the funniest thing when you mentioned music, actually what came to my mind and why I laughed was this term called sound bath.
Oh, yes.
It sounds so what is that? Anyway, but getting back to what really helped me in my coping mechanism, I guess I was blessed and lucky that as a teenager, as I used to go with my friend, and this is the same friend, Kate, we used to go for Latin dance. I already used to do a little bit of Kathak in my childhood back in Mumbai. But when I was in Edmonton, we went to these community classes, So I learned the cha-cha there. I did a little bit of belly dance there. And so I already knew that I really liked this. And then I that kind of led me to doing my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Performing Arts in Kathak, North Indian classical dance. And I did that under the guidance of Pandita Guru Manisha Sathe ji. And she's based in Pune, but of course she's international, and she's just, what a power woman. My mentor, I haven't, of course, mastered or even a fraction of the kind of wealth of information and the talent that she has in Kathak. But I do try to sometimes think a guru is not only about teaching you a certain art form, right? Because how we think it is all about Guru Shishya Parampara, because we try to adopt the way of life, the attitude. You wake up in the morning and you have a certain routine, and then you kind of devote yourself to the art form. You have, and not to say to make it religious, but it's definitely for me the very spiritual journey, because you thank everything, the guru, the for me it's the universe, the ground. You're really grounding yourself in that moment. And here I'm continuing my learning with my guru, senior disciple at Atmika School in Toronto. So Guru Prajakta Dravid, and I really enjoy my learning. So I don't consider myself that I've mastered everything. And I think that's where the beauty lies. Even my guru recently I spoke to her, and she told me, ye badi achhi baat. It is a very good thing about you. At least you know what you know. What you don't know. And you're honest about it, because a lot of people have that ego and chip on their shoulder.
Yes.
And they're like, oh no, I'm the best. I know it all. The thing about coping mechanisms also is that the way I see it, and I know last year I took a course in therapeutic dance. I refused to do the Western, the dance course therapy and be a certified dance therapist, because I'm like, listen, I have a degree in dance. I've been through lived experience, and I know how it's helped me. And I'm here to help you with it too. So I took a course at Meridian Arts Center, where essentially, because I'm a Workman Arts member at Workman Arts organization here in Toronto, they provide excellent opportunities to artists, especially with lived experiences or not, to just kind of, or others as well, to take some courses. And this course was special. It was called Creative Minds Programming, and it was about, essentially, the crux of the course for me was not really having that pressure to be perfect, right? Not replicating a choreography, but doing it for the joy of it. How often do we do that?
Mm.
Now, I'll tell you, I'm actually at my friend's place now. Last night, we played music. We just we jammed, and we took a little video, and we realized in the beginning how, conscious and everything, but then moment we started enjoying that process, that's what dance therapy is all about. You lose yourself in that moment. You're responding to the dance, and it's also very intrinsically motivated. It's what you feel inside and how that movement takes place, and you just don't want to restrict yourself. Having said that, to break the rules, you also have to also learn some rules,
Mm.
right? So that's where, at least for me, and I know I've not mastered all the rules, I'm still trying to learn. So I keep trying to learn, relearn, and unlearn. And so I'm always caught within that thing of, and then even my guru here, like I always say, Prajakta, like, the dancer. She says, yeah, I see your videos. I'm like, okay, but like, because I do all kinds of dance. Like if you see, I really like that because what speaks to me really is the language of music. So when someone says to me, oh, but I don't know this language, so I can't listen to it, I'm like, the musicality, the rhythm, that's what gets me going. So I do a lot of Latin dance. I've taught that also. I used to teach salsa at a university in Dresden as well to the community. And I don't do as much Latin dance here now, but I do it for my improv videos. So I have a YouTube channel, which essentially it's called for like dance therapy and mental health. So essentially I have my name and that. So anyone wants to check that out, I will be sharing the link with you. But
Yeah.
it's just, you just have to like do it for yourself. And again, I'm not doing it for followers because it's something I'm doing it for myself, and I want people to say, okay, you can also do this. It doesn't matter what level of dance you're doing, and it doesn't matter like how you're looking in that moment. It's about how you're feeling in that moment.
We fast forward through being present, and dancing is so much about being in the
Yes.
moment and being present.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because actually that's one of the major quotes in my book as well as in my mom's film, and also what inspired me to design this course, because it's dance for me, which essentially the quote, dance for me is like meditation. It takes me to a different space and in the universe, because it puts a stop to the flow of thoughts. And so essentially I'm in that moment. And I really like that quote also from the Natya Shastra, right? It's like where your hands goes, there your eyes goes, where your eyes goes, there your emotions, feeling, they all go there. And I really try to do that because for me, expressions is the most important part.
Mm.
So I am lacking in the riyaz and, the footwork and everything, because sometimes, with my schedule and extracurriculars and sometimes even my mood, that comes in the way. But I just want to leave listeners with this my guru always says, just keep dancing. So for me, that was dance. And I even did a lot of yoga. So that was also the thing that I wanted to share, that
Another thing that's been
India,
taken from us.
absolutely 100%. It's all become about asanas and body poses and trying to do it becomes like such an aggressive approach.
Weight
It's
loss
really about a way of
and
life.
yeah.
It's a way of life. It's like I consider myself a karma yogi. Like why I want to just do the right thing that I believe is the right thing, which is really like, I don't want to like quote like dharma and all, that'll be too heavy, but like really what I feel and believe, what my core values are out there. Sometimes I'm too authentic and honest for my own good. So either people will love me or hate me, right?
You and I both,
So
buddy. But you know what? I don't care anymore. I think when I just want to go back to the dance for a second.
yeah.
Like you, I have very few memories of childhood, some good, lots not really great. But
Yeah.
a lot of the ones that I have, or when I was present, and when I was present was all the times of my childhood when my cousins and I would get together, and exactly what you said, we'd move the coffee table to the side and we would dance and we would record
Yeah.
ourselves. And, we come from such a creative arts background. If you look at all of our movies in the Indian culture, it's all about dancing and it's all about movement, and you can't really have a movie without a good soundtrack, and all of that plays hand in hand. And I think, when you start digging and you wonder where that comes from, you see it comes from our ancestors. And just like you said, that move and being present, it's phenomenal what it does from the inside. And when we are talking about children's mental health and we're talking about, longevity, our creativity is what keeps us young. It helps us maintain our innocence, an innocence that sometimes is taken too soon. And, I think we forget about that quick because, like you said, we worry and we don't want someone to think we look silly or I didn't get the right dance moves and not. But when we are in that moment of dance, it's mind-blowing. I was at my brother's wedding a couple years ago, and I had some white people come to the wedding. And they had never been to an Indian party before, so it was a big, huge culture shock for them. But one thing the man said to me was, I can't believe everyone's on the dance floor. Your grandma and young children, everyone's dancing together. And I never really thought about it until it was brought up in that way of like, yeah, man, that's what we do. We dance it out, So I wanted to throw that in there because I'm not a professional by any means, but when we get that kind of music and that kind of energy is really what I'm trying to say, moving within us, it does something. I know for me, and I hear for you, and there's a connection to our mental health and well-being. To be honest, music is another way to get those endorphins released. And the dopamine hit that we are looking for from all other quick places, what music can do for us in that way, many of us don't connect it. And I'm so grateful for our community and the kind of music people are making and our choreographers and our dancers and everybody out there, because I'm so proud of this aspect of our culture. And I hope we can continue to put our feet on our ground in that way and our roots and move them like that. So I'm so glad you shared that about music.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just, the only two things that I sometimes have a issue with is when we try to have that little bit of like competition and we try to pull each other down. That's the first thing. And the second thing is also when there's such a high level of performance anxiety that anxiety kind of just, it dissolves what the whole purpose of dance is meant to do.
Yeah. I did a video at my 1 year mark for MFU, and the interviewer asked me, he's like, what's your routine before your interview? And when I first started, I was a lot more nervous than I am today before an interview. And I told them, I said, before every interview, I tell my family to leave me alone and I turn the music on and I dance. And so he even recorded me dancing. And to be honest, I never actually really connected that till right now when you just said what you said.
We have to have a jam together.
We'll
have a jam together. We have to dance together.
we do have to shake our booties together for sure. Right? Yeah. I'll be Madhuri. Dixit, you can be whoever you want.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to add about the creativity? You've been so kind to let us talk for so long.
Yeah, I guess just when it comes to the arts part, definitely what worked for me was also yoga, because I had got a teacher training certificate from Yoga Institute in Mumbai. And that helped me to kind of, I almost taught myself and I just practiced it, like the basic asanas, and then some were more complex, which I could do earlier. I had to like to do it now too, but I don't practice as much. But what tends to happen, especially when it comes to bipolar, is your energy levels are higher. So you have to channelize them positively. So how do you do that? And I essentially did a lot of yoga. I would do a lot of dance. And I mean, that was the better alternative. Like, even if I did not get proper rest or sleep, at least I was channelizing it in a positive manner. So that worked for me. And I was also fortunate that I had a chance at art therapy. So a lot of the paintings, and in fact, the painting which is also on my book cover at the back, which is, just for the descriptions, like an ocean, and then they had a little like elephant om on top. It just, that's what I actually painted while I was, being treated. And it was part of my art therapy. It helped me so much. And of course, there are other aspects of my experience that I don't think we have discussed, and I would like to explore and question. Basically, how the patients are treated and the ill treatment, which still takes place. And I'm going to give a quick trigger warning here. I know we're closing. I just wanted to share this last thing, is because a lot of patients to this day, they have rooms which say medical emergency / isolation room, and basically patients get sent to this place, and it can be such a traumatic experience for patients of all ages who are going through things, and it is inhumane. And whoever's watching this, if there's any medical professionals, I definitely advocate against this practice. And not just because I have been through it, but I know I have seen other people go through it in front of my eyes, and it's heartbreaking. So it's just my request too.
Well, I'm, going to out myself working in mental health. Like I thought that was something that was helpful back in the day. And there's so many of us that go along with that and allow it to keep happening, or think that's what the client or the young person, the adult, whoever needs. And, since I left my profession, this last few years, these are the things that I've been wondering about too, and talking to a lot of our own people. I know a wonderful family, and their first encounter in dealing with mental health was their family member just turned 18. So she was admitted to the adult psychiatric unit.
Yeah.
And the whole family had to witness the way, because she's an adult, to the medical professions, but in her home, she's still a child. The way that they were treated, and the way that they isolated even her from the family, and the family from her. There are so many different ways that isolation actually occurs, whether they're put in an isolation space, or we think for some reason they need a break from the family or what. And I wonder this too. And people like me go to school and think we're being helpful doing these things. And this is why we keep having these conversations, is like, we got to start challenging ourselves more when we're the professionals in this sort of line of work, around what good is this doing. And unfortunately, you have a lot of care workers, like you said earlier, that are burning out and are angry, and really see it as the problem person, and not really managing sort of what the illness they're working with. I think we have a long way to go. I just appreciate people like you and others that are trying to keep pushing that system and saying, no, this is not the way we can do this, because it's not making our community members healthier. It's in fact making it that they hide it and they don't go back and get the support or help that they could get. And so I just worry too about it, because it is terrible. It's sad. I've seen young children in these isolation spaces. I have seen adults, and we just medicate them and drug them out, and then they get aggressive. And so then we think, well, give them more medication, keep them in the isolation space. But when you come from a collective care background, that is probably the biggest form of punishment you can give to someone dealing with such an isolating illness, and leaving them to be alone. And even when you go back to talking about how to support kids, you talked about love, make them seen and give them this. And yet here we are taking all of that away from them. And it makes me really guilty for my role in not pushing enough as well. But you know what? Like we said, we learn, and then we unlearn, and then we keep unlearning, and then we find a new way. And these are what these conversations are about, is opening these doors and helping people that are accessing these services advocate better for themselves, because that treatment is disgusting, and we keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sharing that, because I just wanted it to be executed in a more humane manner, because I mean, I could go into details, and exactly how it is you have these patients put into these spaces, and you have a camera, and you have a space for them to go to the toilet, and there's a camera there, and there's a bed, it's a rock solid bed. You have these kind of spaces, and I'm appalled to hear that this happens with children also. But there has to be a better way, and for us to rework and change the framework, because how can this help? This is not helping anyone but the people actually who are trying to help the patient. This is for the medical establishment. So if we are really trying to create a space for healing and to reduce trauma, then how can we choose way to do it where actually the trauma is increased instead of
it just
being,
perpetuates. Yep.
It perpetuates it, and so it's a never ending cycle. And I did speak about this. I've spoken about this with so many now, and what I continue to hear is that often what happens is that because the turnaround is so high of just people going through situations, I guess one of the biggest challenges, and I guess priorities, is essentially to get them to a space where they're okay to at least leave and try to get better, because you still have people who are leaving and they're not entirely healed, and you have people who are even more intense who are coming.
When you look at the stats, how the revolving door, and really healthcare is what the government is trying to do, is to not have that much money spent, because it costs thousands of dollars a night for someone to access a bed like that at the hospital or in a facility. So they try to cut down the service, and what ends up happening is we end up watering it down, and it's just a fast food version of actual long-term support. And the other issue is we don't have enough people of color in this mental health system. They're not getting accepted to universities to be able to do the work and then go in and help out. And so you then have a lot of Western mentality running Western systems, and it's not really helping. And it's not helping the Western people either. It's just this. Unfortunately, when you deal with crisis in a crisis state, you're never going to get ahead of it. And that's why people are burning out. That's why someone like me also felt like, I can't do this because I'm not helping. I'm actually making it worse. And so I had to leave too, because you get to a place where it's disheartening. What we got to do is disrupt the system by keep shaking it until we can figure out what the heck do we do. So we have like you said, multicultural country where we have a lot of different demographics that are accessing those services, and people aren't getting the training. They think one training, is culturally competent enough, but nobody really cares to learn from a collective. If we keep operating from an individualistic approach, we will never know what it means to be collective. And we can take all the DEI courses and say we had this culture come in and teach us, but there's a divide, and it'll continue to be there until we can understand what it means to be collective.
I guess one thing also that came to me, what ends up happening is that you have all these people who are going through challenges, but what we most often don't look at is, we don't look at it through a solution centric approach, because you have these issues and problems, sure, but what is the root cause? What's creating them? We're not delving into those issues. We're not dissecting it. And I think once we do that, once as a community we can really engage with each other, interact with each other more authentically and in more safer spaces, we can uplift each other in a way to almost prevent even like us being entirely dependent on the medical model. Because, oh man, I am not so much into the medical model now, although I do take medicine, but that honestly I'm just doing because I guess I have this internal fear, and I'm like, okay. And trust me, I think I know like a lot of doctors, even my doctor back in India, like he said that like now half my patients, 50% of them are not even having them and they're fine. So I think I'm going to try to approach that at some point.
I get it, man. It's hard. And right? Like Ishaa gotta help Ishaa. Like sometimes we need the medication. Sometimes it's lifelong. Sometimes it's temporary. But it's one part of our care plan.
It's one part.
There's more to it.
Yeah. Absolutely, you hit it on completely, because you have the medicine, then you have the counseling, then you have the hobbies, then you have the community. And actually what I like to use, and what I do use, actually, the collaborative care system. So my doctor, who I work with closely, they use that system essentially. And that's really where you have these caregivers, and two or three of them, and you constantly reach out to them if you need to, especially when you have to like make a decision. And that is not to say people will tell you what to do. At least you have a kind of sense of where you stand in terms when you kind of need that support,
Yeah.
because you're going through something and you reach out. So now, for example, I'm at a friend's place, I might share something with her. Now what very often happens is people are afraid to share, and that is because of self stigma. Why do we have this self stigma? Because we're told to suppress those feelings, and not only suppress, we're made to feel guilty for even experiencing them. We put ourselves through so much guilt and suppression. And I'd say to like people going through, like, I guess anything, whether it's gender based violence, mental health issues, diagnosis, intergenerational trauma, you name it, just use art, journal, try to find ways to connect with yourself, and the light will be seen.
Because here's the thing, when we don't do that, all of the, whether it's illness, whether it's struggles, however you want to word it, it will find its way. And the first place it will find its way to is our body. And our body, will try to take that. I mean, you look at our elders, you look at our mothers, you look at their journey in all of what they were never allowed to do was to talk. Like you said, it's all been suppressed. And we as mothers, when we carry our babies, we're passing that all on to them. I was never in India when the partition happened. I was never in India when my ancestors were colonized, but I'm carrying a lot of that with me now because we were never able to deal with it. And people think I'm crazy when I do. My own people think I'm crazy when I talk like that. And I think that's so sad because it's been suppressed so long. So I think the thing that I know to do best is to talk. And that's what we got to keep doing, is keep it going. So I'm going to ask you, before you leave today, what is one thing you want to put your middle fingers up to?
So I'm going to put my middle fingers up to patriarchy.
Why? Quick note about that. Why?
Yeah. So I because I think that we have faced it so many times, and only the realization comes later that when you look back into your life and you're like, oh yeah, that's patriarchy, that's patriarchy, that's patriarchy. And why do we not do anything about it? Is because we think that's the norm and we can't challenge it and we cannot disrupt it. So here I am to put my middle fingers up to that, because it just, we need to do that. We need to challenge it. And there's nothing wrong with being a feminist, and there's nothing wrong with even like challenging those. But again, if we're really talking about ideologies, be who you want to be, really. Don't be afraid, to really express yourself and compartmentalize yourself in those labels again. But still, middle fingers up to patriarchy.
That's a great one, as we are kicking off International Women's Month. So that's fantastic. I love that. Okay. Is there anything that you wish I had asked you today, or that you want to go back and clarify or add to?
I do want to add to one thing that you had touched upon, which is the intergenerational trauma. And I find that so interesting, because I find that also what happens within our families is we reconcile within our families over time. And then we find out certain things about our ancestors, which not only shock us, sometimes it comes as a sweet surprise, or many other things. There's lessons that we learn. Like there's so many positive lessons. Like I can share one that I learned from my dad's side is gali ka mochi ban, lekin sabse behtareen mochi ban, which is basically translated into if you want to be a shoe cobbler, be the best one in your street. So it can be positive things like that come out, and you have like negative instances too, which you learn about certain individuals in your family and how that impacts you. And that also kind of adds to the trauma of also knowing, but then also of carrying it in our bodies. I found that very interesting that you brought that up, because it exists for all of us. And I think it not only exists for us in terms of cultures, but also in terms of humans as a race and through what humans have been through history. So if we look at it through that, like we can be micro or macro lens, but really it's so pertinent. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Call to action. If there was one thing and only one thing our listeners, viewers are going to leave with today, what do you hope they leave with?
This was, I really do want to leave only this with them, because this is what my uncle left me with. And I will say it again because it's already been said in this conversation. But for me, it is let Ishaa help Ishaa. So whatever your name or whatever you perceive yourself to be, just find that force. May the fourth be with you, right?
Yeah.
Find that force find that force within
Star
you.
Wars fan over here.
It's internal. You gotta and you know what? It's that tipping point. So I will also say this, is that once that happens, there is no turning back. Nothing can stop you in this world. The moment you realize how empowered you yourself are, it just gets easier from that point onwards. So yeah.
So well said. I'm so sad that we're ending this now. So we're going to have you come back because there's so many more things that I'm sure we could have shared. But I do want to thank you so much for your time. I always say these conversations are door openers. We're just starting to have them, and those of us that are having them, we're learning, and we're not saying everything perfect or right, but we definitely are trying to build a community that wants to add on to these conversations. And so we invite anyone listening or viewing today to reach out to us and share your feedback if you want to be part of a conversation like this. And I actually want to thank so many people like you, Ishaa, who do reach out and say, I want to be part of this this is how you came today. And so I'm so honored when anyone and everyone reaches out and says, hey, I want to be part of this, because, we're just trying to rebuild our community. I also want to give you an opportunity. So if people want to find you and they want to find your book, where can we go and find you and your book?
Sure. So currently it's available on Amazon. And if you type the name of the book, there should be other sources as well, because I know not everyone wants to use Amazon, but there's Amazon and Kindle version.
Own Books International as well.
Yes, Own Books International essentially is my publisher. So Own Books International. And the audiobook will be coming out soon.
Good.
And we'll be coming up with a series with that. And also I did not share, but this little thing in the background here, it's essentially the logo of an NGO that I launched last year, which it's called Finding Order and Disorder Foundation. So it focuses on using multidisciplinary arts for healing in mental health, opening those conversations. So again, I've also just ventured on a journey to do podcasts and being inspired by individuals like you. So if you ever want to reach out to even have a conversation, you can reach me at, on my LinkedIn, which you just put in my name, Ishaa Vinod Chopra, and then I have my YouTube channel, which is Ishaa Vinod Chopra, Dance Therapy and Mental Health, hashtag at Finding Order and Disorder. And my Instagram is also, I think, at Finding Order and Disorder Forever. And I will be sharing those links with you anyway. And thank you so much for having me, Kiran. And this is just, it's been a wonderful interaction. I'm blessed to have this. Yeah.
Likewise, appreciate you kicking off International Women's Month with us. Thank you.